3, 2, 1, and we start. All right, so welcome everyone to session number 8 on this Monday afternoon. The topic is computational materials, and the same procedure as in the other sessions if you've been participating. So we have about 10 minutes per each presentation, and then after that we take 10 minutes of discussion time. And please do help me with the questions. So if there's anything that comes to your mind, leave a note in the chat window and we'll pick it up from there, and I'll ask you to actually lead the discussion then after the presentations. And let's try to also do a proper round of applause. So after all of the talks, press the space bar to quickly unmute yourself, and let's thank the speakers properly. Let's see how this works remotely. First up, we have Keith Davis, and you can start your presentation.
All right. Okay, so you can hear my mic, and we checked the audio, so here goes.
Brainsourcing is a novel technique that unifies the fields of crowdsourcing and brain-computer interfacing. It allows people to collaborate on recognition tasks using only their brain signals evoked in response to a given information stimulus. Brainsourcing builds upon the concept of crowdsourcing, but instead of manual labor, it relies on contributions of individual people by implicitly monitoring their brain activity while they encounter information-intensive tasks. Crowdsourcing, more generally, is a paradigm in which ideas, data products, and intellectual work are produced by a large group of individuals, unbounded by time or space. In crowdsourcing, tasks are divided among individuals to achieve a collective result. Crowdsourcing is a broad field, and tasks can be roughly divided into two categories: macro work and micro work. Macro work often requires special skills and quite a bit of time to complete. Examples of macro work include open source software development and editing Wikipedia articles. Micro work does not require specialized training or skills, and most tasks can be completed in a short amount of time. Featurizing images and transcribing scanned text, as with Google's reCAPTCHA service, are examples of micro work. For our experiment, we focus on micro work in the form of recognition tasks, where users look for images matching a certain description.
Keith,
Yeah.
Keith, it looks like your slides are stuck on the first slide for us. Can you try restarting?
Sure.
I saw some weird
Brainsourcing
that I haven't saw earlier about Spotlight video.
It's a novel technique.
All right.
Brainsourcing is a novel technique that unifies the fields of crowdsourcing and brain-computer interfacing. It allows people to collaborate on recognition tasks using only their brain signals evoked in response to a given information stimulus. Brainsourcing builds upon the concept of crowdsourcing, but instead of manual labor, it relies on contributions of individual people by implicitly monitoring their brain activity while they encounter information-intensive tasks. Crowdsourcing, more generally, is a paradigm in which ideas, data products, and intellectual work are produced by a large group of individuals, unbounded by time or space.
Is it working now?
In crowdsourcing, tasks are divided among individuals to achieve a collective result. Crowdsourcing is a broad field, and tasks can be roughly divided into two categories: macro work and micro work. Macro work often requires special skills and quite a bit of time to complete. Examples of macro work include open source software development and editing Wikipedia articles. Micro work does not require specialized training or skills, and most tasks can be completed in a short amount of time. Featurizing images and transcribing scanned text, as with Google's reCAPTCHA service, are examples of micro work. For our experiment, we focus on micro work in the form of recognition tasks, where users look for images matching a certain description. Brain-computer interfacing is an interaction paradigm driven by real-time neural activity collected from a user. This brain activity can be recorded using a variety of methods. One of the most popular, and the one used in this experiment, is electroencephalography, also known as EEG. EEG is a technique to record electrical activity of the brain, typically done by measuring changes in voltage at the surface of the scalp. This electrical activity is related to neural processes occurring in the brain. EEG data has a high temporal resolution. However, its spatial resolution is quite poor. So while EEG data can be used with a high degree of accuracy to detect when a neural event has occurred, it cannot be as easily used to determine where it occurred. Event-related potentials, commonly referred to as ERPs, are a key feature of EEG data. ERPs are time-locked voltage fluctuations produced by the brain in response to some event, such as viewing a face or moving a muscle. ERPs consist of positive and negative components, characterized by a variety of amplitudes and latencies. To automatically interpret ERPs, machine learning models can be trained to distinguish between ERPs produced by different events. In fact, brain-computer interfaces that use EEG often follow an ERP-based approach to facilitate user interaction, such as with BCI spelling programs. Statistical techniques are then used to distinguish between the types of responses. In this experiment, we make use of the P300, an ERP component associated with attention and memory. Let's say we have a test subject who will let us record some EEG. We ask the subject to look for faces of smiling people, and then show them faces of people smiling, target class, and not smiling, non-target class. Now, the ERPs produced by smiling faces are distinguishable from the ERPs produced by faces that were not smiling. This is indicated by the larger positive peak visible at around 300 milliseconds post-stimulus, the P300. Stimuli of the target class, that is, with the feature of interest, will produce ERPs that contain a P300 component. Stimuli not containing a feature of interest, part of the class non-target, will typically produce ERPs without a noticeable P300. This effect is reliable enough where we can train a classifier such that, given an ERP, we can determine the class of stimuli that produced it with a reasonable level of accuracy. Brainsourcing takes this classification approach a step further. The classification accuracy of a single brain-based model, while better than random, is still not high enough to compete with more conventional approaches. Rather than simply relying upon the brain responses of a single individual to determine classes of stimuli, it's possible to combine predictions derived from many individuals' brains. Using this approach, brainsourcing achieves results that are significantly better than any individual model. We will now provide a brief overview of how the brainsourcing pipeline is constructed. Full details can be found within the paper. First, we need a brainsourcing worker. Okay. The worker is placed in front of a computer screen and fitted with an EEG cap and electrodes. They are then asked to complete a recognition task where they look for faces that match a certain description, such as having dark hair or a smile. The worker does not need to provide any explicit feedback. They simply sit back and observe as faces are presented to them on screen while their scalp voltages are recorded. In practice, it looks something like this.
There's no audio for this, just so you know.
After collecting enough training data from the worker, a classifier model is trained using the ERPs produced by each stimulus. When a worker is then presented with a new stimulus, the ERP it produces is fed into the classifier model, which uses features present in the ERP to determine the class of the stimulus. But remember, we're conducting brain sourcing here, so we need to repeat this procedure for multiple individuals. By training models for other brain sourcing workers and combining many predictions for the same stimulus, we can classify images with higher accuracy than any individual model. To ensure the brain sourcing model performs better than individual models, the results are analyzed in 3 ways. First, by showing that the brain responses are reliable. Second, by measuring the performance of correctly classified tasks. Third, by investigating the changes in what the classifier learns when a crowd is used instead of individuals. To show the brain responses are reliable, we can plot the ERPs produced by the 2 classes of stimuli across all tasks and visually compare them. As we can see, there is a distinct difference between ERPs produced by target and non-target images, and this difference is present for all tasks. To measure the performance of correctly classified tasks, we compare classification results as data from more participants are used in the brain sourcing estimations. In this case, we take a representative sample of blonde faces and dark-haired faces for task blonde, and visualize whether these stimuli were correctly classified by the brain sourcing model using their associated ERPs. As we can see, as the data from a greater number of participants is used in the brain sourcing model, performance improves and the number of misclassified stimuli appears to decrease. Analyzing this more empirically across a larger sample size using F1 score, we find the same phenomenon holds true. Further analysis of the brain-sourced estimations reveals a clear bimodal distribution as data from more participants are added to the models. This reflects the nature of the stimuli data and further suggests that the brain sourcing model is indeed learning something meaningful. In this research, we showed that human brain responses can be effectively utilized in a crowdsourcing setting. Combining predictions from just 2 participants already yields an F1 score of 0.77 across all tasks. Combining predictions from 12 participants achieves an F1 score of 0.94 across all tasks. This performance is high enough that it could be used in real-world situations. Due to the sensitive nature of brain-based data, it's important to recognize potential ethical and privacy issues that may arise from brain sourcing. Widespread adoption of brain-computer interfaces is not yet a reality. However, with continued improvements to existing technologies, it could be in the near future. When brain-computer interfaces are as common as the mouse, keyboard, or touchscreen, anyone could become a brain sourcing worker. This may lead to unethical labor or revenue models, like replacing conventional advertisements with brain-sourced microtasks. EEG data can serve as a biometric identifier. Brain sourcing data that is improperly handled could reveal the identity of a worker. Meanwhile, governments, corporations, and criminal organizations might use these systems in ways that violate an individual's right to privacy and autonomy. New forms of malware could also emerge, where brain-computer interfaces are hacked to conduct subliminal probing for private information. With widespread adoption of ethical design practices and privacy-preserving techniques within the brain-computer interfacing community, we may be able to reduce the risks associated with this technology.
So, thank you.
Let's clap around. Thank you so much. That's really, really fascinating piece of work, and also work that doesn't really, let's just put it this way, it doesn't look like it's easy work to conduct. There's a lot of apparatus and a lot of technical aspects to actually conducting this research. Do we have any questions, or shall I start with the questioning process? If you have something, please, yes. So Kash, do you want to take this? Go ahead and just ask.
Yeah, okay. I guess my question is quite an obvious, or the first one would come to mind is how far beyond just binary classification have you already tried, and what is your opinion about how far you could go? So could you do tasks such as labeling or further that is typical for crowdsourcers?
Well, so this hold on, I'm going to take my headphones out. This uses the P300 component, which is related to relevance. So it's one of those things that seems to be mediated by a lot of different processes in the brain. So, for example, one task that we've done that actually does better than this, but we haven't written the paper yet, is like brain tinder. So the GAN architecture we used, it was trained on celebrity data and their faces. So it's very easy to produce attractive looking people. And what we did was in the same experiment where people were classifying blonde and dark haired and smiling or not smiling and old and young, we also had them rate on a scale of 1 to 3 or 0 to 3, and also like manually. So they would conduct that same task, and they would just be looking for people that they would swipe right on some sort of dating app. And then afterwards to get their like, okay, what was their true rating? They picked the number of times that they actually said that they would have swiped right on that. And I think I have to double check, but the F1 scores are somewhere in the mid 70s, which is actually quite good. It's like, better than at least the binary classification. But the binary classification was also quite boring for people. So that could also be an issue, is that people tend to fall asleep. So.
Cool. Brain tinder sounds dangerous, possibly.
Sorry.
The brain tinder sounds potentially dangerous, but
I think
tricky.
Dangerous is a good word to describe. I think this work has such a tremendous potential, but also a lot of unethical directions to explore. So I was quite happy to see a long list of discussion on ethics on this paper, which probably could be extended for another 10 pages if we wanted to. But it's really nice work. What kind of technical problems, if any, did you have? Because the whole study apparatus seems like it takes quite a bit of work to get it set up.
Yeah, we have a dedicated neuroscientist on our team, so he sort of deals with all of that. For the most part, it's no, like I didn't really talk at all about the pre-processing pipeline, and with this, the idea was to do everything in simple ways, like the cleaning out noise and these artifacts that appear in EEG data that can make it hard or difficult to classify a signal. You have to filter those out in some way. And there are very advanced techniques, but you have to basically have an experimenter manually tune things. And so here, I guess the biggest issue was noise. And for that, you can do online processing. And the idea behind this was that in the same session, people would be able to use their brains to classify signals. But in practice, it didn't happen that way because we didn't have the model yet built. But
all right. And one more thing that caught my eye in the video, the actual user study, people were seeing the targets or the faces in very rapid succession. So it was like really like just half a second or even less per face. Did you have any problems with participants? Because that seems like a thing that
that's how
at least that's how it works.
Yeah, no, I was let's see, when was this? This experiment was done 2 years ago. So when I first came on board, it surprised me as well. But for the most part, it's almost all well, there's a certain amount of conscious processing that goes on, but it happens so fast that people are able to process within about a 0.4 seconds whether something was relevant or not. There's
one more. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to just say it's called rapid serial visual presentation. That's that's common for this.
All right. One more question someone is asking over chat. So Lars, go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Very fascinating, interesting work. I just wanted to follow up on the last thing you said. So was it actually that people were in their mind thinking yes, no, or was this more like a subconscious reaction that you captured?
It seems to work with both, but I mean, you still need to be paying attention. But for the most part, people's response time is not fast enough. Like the P300, it happens on an order of magnitude much faster than human, well, I don't want to say the human mind, but when people are like thinking that they're being consciously aware of it, it's already happening. And often that can actually hurt the experiment because it bleeds in to future stimuli. Because if they're constantly thinking something and you're showing them these images very, very quickly, there can be some confounding effects. But yeah, for the most part, this seems to be, well, there's some other additional findings regarding like gradations of people's preferences. So for example, we also found that if there was a high ranked in the brain Tinder data, which we haven't published yet, but if we have a high ranked set of images that people ranked low on their explicit preference task. So when they were manually plugging that in, the ERPs still showed that they found those faces attractive and they matched some sort of group preference. So there's something else going on. So sometimes people's explicit ratings are actually misleading in some ways. So, but yeah, that's for some other talk.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Kashyap talking about grids, interactive layout design with integer programming. So Kash, it's all yours.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to do it live and not use a video. So let me just set up my presentation.
While we're doing that, does anyone know what this cancel the spotlight video means? Is this what was causing the hiccup last time, or?
No, this is to make sure that YouTube follows the correct speaker and doesn't overlay the wrong person on the stream.
All right, excellent, thanks.
Okay, I believe you can see my slides well enough now. Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all virtually here. I'm Kashyap from Aalto University, and I'm presenting this work on behalf of my co-authors, Niraj, Taru, Antti, and myself. In case there's something wrong with the video, you can also, or the presentation, you can get a copy of the slides also using this link. I've posted it on the chat. Anyways, moving on, I'm here to talk about our paper called Grids, Interactive Layout Design with Integer Programming. And in this work, we basically discuss how optimization techniques can be used to interactively support designers in their tasks, such as creating user interface layouts. The basic inspiration for this work comes from the observation that grid-based layouts are quite commonly used to create user interfaces, both in the design stage, so when the designer is prototyping and sketching, as well as during deployment. So in production, you can also see websites that commonly use grid-based layouts like this New York Times web page. And what we want to do is basically support designer in the task of creating layouts that have this kind of format. So the basic question we then ask is that how can a computer or an automated system support designers or humans during that task of grid-based layout design? And what we do is basically we present an approach which is based on integer programming. And what it does is when a designer specifies the input task in the form of a design or in the form of user interface elements that they want in their final design. So in this example, you can see that the user wants to create some sort of a web page which has some elements like a footer, a header, some text, images, lists, and all the other typical components that you might find at a website. This system actually takes this as input, and what it does is generate different design solutions and provides these as suggestions to the designer. So you can see for the given task on the left-hand side, the system has generated 3 different unique designs that are slight variations of each other. Our work is basically grounded in a long line of work on computational layout and design generation. Some examples here that have been very inspiring to us as well. One on the left is Supple from Gajos and Daniel Weld. This was done back in 2004, where the design was generated entirely from some UI specification So it was more meant for engineers who wanted to not worry about actual layout tasks, but focus on the actual outcomes themselves. So what they would do is specify the description of the design, and the system would generate a final or variations of final designs. And another example is Bricolage by Ranjita Kumar and colleagues from Kai a few years ago, where they basically did this sort of a remix approach, where you had an initial starting point for a design and your new design that you wanted to adapt based on this initial starting point. And the system would take a mix of these two and create a new layout for you. But what we want to do is support this interactive task of designers who are actually experts in creating such user interface layouts, and do this in a mixed initiative fashion where the designers interacting with the computer and both their skills are taken into account. And there have been some works that have attempted similar things in the past. One has been Designscape, which was meant to generate single page graphics, things like PowerPoint slides or posters. And here, basically, the designer would start off by specifying some design, and the system would give you ideas in the forms of tweaks or brainstorming suggestions. I myself and others also did some work on this a few years ago and presented this at DIS. And here what we had was an environment known as Sketchflow, where the designer would interactively explore different layout designs while sketching out their ideas. However, what we want to do is apply these approaches towards grid-based layouts, which have common patterns in them or common concepts. So what we do is basically we encapsulate different grid layout objectives that are commonly seen in different pages. The first one being alignment. So you can see one example here where there are 3 or 4 different alignment groups of elements, and alignment basically specifies how well items are composed in relation to each other. And the next one is rectangularity, which talks about the overall page layout itself. So in this example, you can see that the outline itself forms this nice rectangular hull in which all the objects are enclosed. So the idea is that when a page has good rectangularity, it's more appealing or more usable to the audience as compared to something with jagged edges and a lot of different contours. And finally, since we're talking about pages with semantics, there's also the problem of placing elements at preferred location. For example, if you have a website with a logo and a title, you would ideally want them to be somewhere near the top of the page. And if it's got something like a confirm button, you would want this to be towards the bottom of the page. So we also consider how a designer would place objects at the locations preferred. And using this, basically, we formulate a grid layout problem, which can then be solved by an automatic approach such as integer programming. In addition to this, to support designers in their task, we also consider some additional factors, one of them being diversification of layout. So a common problem with computational techniques is that the results, although distinct from each other or different from each other, might actually appear very similar finally to the user. And we take that into account when diversifying layouts. And the next one is we come from the idea that a designer might already have some idea of what their layout should be. So they might know where some elements should be placed in position, but they want to basically start off with this partial solution and then come up with the final design. So we support completion of designs. And finally, we also want to support local search where a designer is searching for alternatives. And these 3 objectives are then also encapsulated within the optimization system. And basically, what we first did is that we verified that the layouts that were generated by our mixed integer linear programming approach were actually good, and they were done reliably. And to do that, what we did was basically we conducted a study where users would judge the quality of different layouts. So before the study, we generated layouts with varying levels of optimality given by the optimizer itself. So we created a set of layouts that were deemed to be excellent, another set of layouts that were only average in rating, and another set of poor layouts. And then using this, we basically asked participants to rate each of the layouts on a scale of 1 to 5, for example, using stars. And what we found was basically that the score given by the optimizer was a good indicator of the participants' opinion as well. So these correlated very well indeed. So taking that forward, we implemented a design tool with keeping in mind some key features that we would like to support. And the first key feature that we would like to support is this exploration of diverse design solutions that I mentioned earlier. So what happens here is when the designer specifies the design task in a very loose way, you can see here that the designers basically just said, okay, I want these 10 elements on my layout page, give me some different solutions. This is a very vague starting point, and here the designer is looking to explore different possibility. So what the system then does is generate a lot of diverse design solutions and presents this to the designer in the form of a easily scrollable gallery. The next one is the auto-completion of partial design. So here, when the designer starts with the partial task, like you can see here in this example, that the designer knows where the heading should be and a footer should be. And also they know that there should be 2 sidebars on their page. But they still haven't decided the positioning or the placement of these remaining elements on the workspace. Taking this as the input design, the system can then also generate complete solutions by placing each of the elements while maintaining the designer's original design idea. And the third one is the exploitation of local alternatives. So this is where the designer is searching for similar alternatives. And so when you have an original design, the system can basically give you alternatives that might be slightly different from each other. And finally, the designer might also want to specify some constraints on the design. For example, they might want to lock some elements in place or say what element goes where, and they can do that using additional constraints. And once they specify, the optimizer would respect these constraints and still give out some different design ideas. So these are different features that go into the system itself. And we implemented this within a tool called Grids, which is short for Generating Real-Time Interface Design Suggestions. It was quite an apt title, I would say. And this is a brief demo of what the system looks like. So this is the basic user interface. You can see there's a canvas in the middle and the typical element sidebar on the left-hand side. And the new thing is this Explorer panel on the right-hand side. And basically what happens is when the designer starts sketching something on the canvas, for example, a heading element here, and they can vary the properties using the elements panel. And now here the designer doesn't know where some other elements should go, so they just place them on the workspace loosely. So in this case, a paragraph and another heading. And they can vary the different properties. And while they're doing this, the optimizer is basically observing the designer's action, and at any time the designer can then trigger the optimizer and get suggestions in real time. So all results are presented in a gallery and they can immediately continue editing them or directly just save them into the Save Layouts panel for future reference. So using this approach, it's providing designers with this mixed initiative tool or interactive tool where the designer is doing some tasks, specifying the design in a very loose manner without actually being restricted to over-specifying the problem. And the optimizer is then looking at the designer's task and giving out solutions that it thinks is good. And the designer can then take these as starting points or continue editing them, or even use these as final designs. So that's the basic idea behind the Grids design tool. And this is something we tested out in a designer study where we invited basically 16 professional designers and gave them 3 design tasks that were quite similar to what they would do on a daily basis, starting from a pretty easy task to get them warmed up to something more complicated, and then finally a free-form design task of their choice. And we found that the system was easy to use and it adequately supported exploration as well, which is an important feature. And designers particularly liked the autocomplete aspect where they could partially specify the design and get results. So that sums up our work. And these are some of the design layouts from the study, just some examples that were created in short amounts of time with or without the support of the optimizer, so the designer could choose when to use suggestions. To summarize, our work makes 3 contributions in this area of interactive layout design. The first one is we present this mixed integer linear programming model that encapsulates the grid layout problem. And we provide additional computational techniques to support needs such as exploration, exploitation, and also auto-completion. And finally, we present the grids tool, which is to support designers in real-time design tasks. With that, I'd like to conclude my talk and I'd like to thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. Let's do the applause then. Thank you so much, really. That's also amazing work. Do we have any questions or shall I go first? Yes, you may ask a question. So go ahead, just unmute.
Unmute it. Yeah. Hello, Kashyap. It was a great talk.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to know how transferable is this approach for 3D environments and 3D settings?
So you mean when you're using, for example, a virtual reality
Yeah,
setup?
exactly, or AR, yeah.
Yeah, I think integer programming has been applied in such a setting as well before. For example, there was a work in WISP last year, which was more about adaptive interfaces, where the system would adapt the location and the size, for example, of different windows itself. So instead of taking a website as the element, the system would take the different windows that one might have and decide the placement of these within this 3D environment. So you could adopt similar approaches as long as you can specify the problem in terms of this computational technique. So you could specify your objective, what you want to achieve by, and how. So for a 2D layout, you have this well-defined grid layout concept where you have aspects such as rectangularity and alignment. For a 3D layout, it's not really clear how that transfers. But if you could define those aspects, you could take the same formulation and apply these new concepts.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also see Antti left a pointer in the chat for a review paper about these things if someone is interested to learn more. Do we have more questions? All right, I have one. Have you thought about impression management with this kind of tool? Obviously, you were going for this kind of intuitive usability of the layouts, but one area where I see this being tremendously useful would be real-world optimization of impression of those areas, basically. So if you think how, for example, Google's banner ads are being monetized, they need to be somehow strategically above the fold so that the users who even visit a web page for just a few minutes or a few seconds, they are still given the impression. So some kind of trade-off between monetizing a property versus its usability. Would this be extendable toward that direction somehow?
So you mean, for example, in your case where Google's placing a banner and they definitely want the user to see it?
Yeah, because actually how it works is so that you have to scroll down in order to see the banner in order for the impression to happen. So
yeah, so I think if you use something like saliency, where the computational technique then tries to optimize for saliency of elements. So for example, you could say this is my banner element and I give it high importance. And then the model could then take this into account and consider by varying the size and position, how the saliency would be affected. And then that would also change the likelihood of users visiting or viewing that part of the screen.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And it's just interesting because, I mean, obviously designers of a website, they are in love with their designs. And then if we have a tool telling them that, no, your layout may be actually wrong, there's going to be an interesting human factor there also to explore. How willing are actual designers to accept this kind of recommendations from a tool that are objectively better in achieving something than what they think themselves that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, yeah, we're in love with our own children, basically.
Yeah.
So
that's a good point. And I think for that, what's also important then is at what point does the tool intervene? So there's one option where the designer does their tasks and then later on, afterwards, after the fact, they refer to the tool and the tool says, oh, no, you did that wrong and maybe you should do this. And in contrast, if the tool is actually actively doing this in real time with the designer, so collaboratively, one might say, then there might be this issue circumvented somehow because the designer's thinking, okay, they're doing this together, and it's not like the tool's giving all the agency in this case.
Yeah. All right. Thank you once again. I guess we're running out of time on this one, and we have to be moving on to the next one. So, Midas, are you ready? And also, thank you for the pointers in the chat. Keep them coming for the next one as well. This is a good way to share knowledge. All right, Midas.
Yes. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so my name is Midas Nouwens, and I am a PhD student in Denmark at Aarhus University. And hold on, I've got all of people's screens on my screen, so I can't see my slides. There we go. Okay, and this is a paper I did together with my colleagues Marcel, Bjarke, and Clemens on a computational media for biomolecular nanoscience called Between Scripts and Applications. And this is a kind of like a 2-year participatory design process where we work together with a group of biomolecular nanoscientists, and they are quite special in the sense that they have invented a new way of using biological materials as a building block for artificial things. So, for example, for delivering medicine to a particular part of your body. And what this is called is RNA origami, which if you have this little worm in the corner, which is an RNA string, which is just a kind of like macromolecule in your body. And they've developed a method of basically folding it into non-arbitrary structures. So because it's not arbitrary, it's basically a tiny little robot that you can then make things do in your body. And they're quite reliant on computational tools to do this because it's quite an exploratory process. And to design what this combination of molecules is to be able to fold in this way, they have to do a lot of basically exploring alternatives. But they're not trained as programmers. And so the thing that we asked for this entire research project, and there was a lot of back and forth, and so also the structure of this presentation is sometimes difficult to do because there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, because through this participatory design, what we designed was influenced by the qualitative data that we gathered. So it's a bit like that. But the two things that I want to talk about is first, what is the role of computation in the work of biomolecular nanoscientists? And then second, what does a computational medium look like that would support their work? So this is, like I said, this was a participatory design process. We started with collecting a bunch of qualitative information about doing observations and interviews. Then we did workshops. And then over the course of a year, we did a lot of iterations on a particular prototype. And then we used that as a conversation piece to get more information about how that would look if they actually implemented that into their like regular work practice. So what is the role of computation in the work of these biomolecular nanoscientists? There were three kind of characteristics that really stood out. The particular culture that they have around computation, their work with, or their struggles with computational environments, and the effect of those things together, the feelings of disempowerment. So I'll try and briefly address all of these before moving on to the prototype presentations. The first one on computational culture. What was interesting is that because this was biomolecular nanoscience, and nanoscience is kind of an interdisciplinary catch-all term for just things on a really, really small scale, because they came out of biology, their methods and their relationship to their tools was also based on biology. So as one of the participants said, you know, it's derived from molecular biology, so their methods are black box machines, right? They don't really have a tendency to build their own tools the way that physicists might do. And that is fine if you're working in an established part of the science, but because this particular group was working on the frontier, it meant that there were no machines that other people had built for them, right? So they basically had to invent the methods as they were trying to gather the new knowledge as well. And so one participant really struggled with this when they were moving from analyzing RNA in their previous job to working with this lab, where also they had to like design RNA. And so he went from, you know, really well-supported workflows with user interfaces to nothing, right? And that then gets compounded with the fact that computer science or programming or any of these type of skills aren't part of their formal education process. Now, this then leads to a lot of struggles that they had. And interestingly, and this is really trying to push back against the narrative that, once people learn how to code, and all of a sudden they'll be able to unleash the power of computers in their work. The struggles that they have weren't so much about the programming, but instead about managing all of the different execution environments. Because they don't really get trained in a particular language, and because they were just desperate for any type of computational tool that will help them do their job, they were doing a lot of stealing. So like a magpie, they would be stealing a lot of scripts from colleagues or from the web. And so they had to manage this quite complex environment of different language interpreters and navigating different files to the terminal. And that meant that quite often, if something didn't work, they didn't really know how to solve that issue, managing that environment. And then that particular area of research was basically just closed off to them. So the first quote talking about how somebody wanted to use a software that a lot of people had, but couldn't. And he's like, oh, I maybe have to run some kind of virtual machine or operating system, not sure. So I just gave up. And one of the other consequences of not being able to actually use the execution environment is that in the second quote, there was somebody who was working together. That person had shared a code that they had. He couldn't get it to run on his computer. So then instead he said, oh, here's a design of a structure. You then run the script on it and then tell me whether or not that's feasible, right? So this is quite like a big bottleneck for that process. And then that turns into this kind of feeling of disempowerment. And this was something that it really became like a chronic feeling of helplessness, and unfortunately then also them blaming themselves for their lack of knowledge about the situation. And then they had to rely a lot on unstable workarounds because they had to talk to somebody who was maybe more aware or understanding of programming and be like, oh, could you please help me with this? But obviously their entire working conditions were very much trying to deal with an environment that they didn't understand. So what would a computational medium look like that does actually support their work? Because there is this really big need of having a flexibility in the tools that they're using to develop new methods to revolutionize science, while at the same time having a stable support for something that doesn't require them to understand the bits and bolts of a computer. And so this is kind of the spectrum that we're talking about also in the title between scripts and applications, where you have scripts where they have a really high ceiling of what's possible, but require a deep understanding of the entire stack of a computer, right? You have to know kind of how to navigate your file system through the terminal. You might have to be able to debug what's happening in your console, versus applications, which don't allow you for any type of computation, authoring computation, but are self-contained and are much more approachable. And then we have computational notebooks as kind of a new medium that's become more popular recently, like Jupyter Notebook, where you have sort of a combination of the two, where you can do some programming, you can execute some scripts, and you can also just do some word processing as you're normally used to. But they're still leaning towards the script side, as in the people, the audience that they're targeting are people who understand how to run a local server to be able to open a Jupyter Notebook, or how to do package management in those things. And so what we want to do with this particular user group was, okay, can you have something similar like that? Can you have some kind of malleable computation, but closer towards the usability that we're used to with applications? And this is the exploration we did around a couple of different design principles for this type of computational media. And this is based on previous work that was done in the research group here around these 4 principles. So shareability, which then refers to the ability to share and collaborate with other people across different time zones, synchronously, asynchronously, multiple people. Then you have malleability, referring to being able to change and appropriate the tools as you're using them. Distributability, that you can kind of effortlessly move between different devices across device interactions. And computability, so you can execute and write and edit code in the environment and see it together with the data, right? That it's in the same perceptual space. So I can't show too much of this just in interest of time, but we developed a system that basically at the top here, you see basically a 2D representation of an RNA structure. So it's like, oh, this is something that we might be able to design that can fold in a particular way. And then they have on the right here a whole set of tools. And these are the scripts they currently use that were built by somebody who just happened to know some programming and that they've been struggling and muddling through with. And so we turned that into a web-based platform where they can drag and drop these tools basically just anywhere in some kind of notebook structure. They can run it. And so this particular one is about then visualizing what that structure could look like in 3D. So they can do like the first test of would this be feasible to then later on design in the lab, right? Because this is like for the design process of what possible structures could be. And there's a bunch of other stuff to this as well that I'm happy to talk about later. What we then use, so we use that that tool as a conversation piece. We let them execute a couple of tasks that they normally do in their everyday kind of work process. And then we ask them like, okay, how does this actually correlate with these design principles that we're suggesting here? Because these come, yes, out of previous work, but not really based on any kind of empirical data. So the reflection we got on that was that shareability, which mostly was imagined as real-time collaboration, actually wasn't that interesting in that sense because they didn't do a lot of collaboration with other people, but instead it was really, really useful for them to be able to share self-contained computational environments really easily with other people that they were collaborating with. But then it created a need of being able to see the traces of activity that people had and also being able to pinpoint, you know, what computed what and what affected this other thing. When it came to malleability, which generally also in the end user development environment is talked about as kind of like continuous tinkering with your code, because they didn't necessarily have those skills, they weren't really interested in this. Instead, it was much more about having some kind of system that allows malleability to be shared across a network of perhaps more capable peers. So it's a collective software transformation rather than a very individual perspective. But usually this is a binary choice, right? Either it is malleable or it isn't malleable. Instead, they said, oh, well, it'd be good to be able to identify which parts are or are less, more or less malleable. Distributability, the way that it was talked about before, it was very much about being able to share documents across devices and operating systems, as well as functionality. So kind of like orchestrating across different devices. But that, again, wasn't that necessarily for them because they had regular file sharing systems for the documents and they didn't really have multiple devices that they were working with. Instead, the idea of distributing computation was incredibly useful for them, especially because they're running a lot of heavy scripts. And so being able to offload that to another computer so they could actually close their laptop at night rather than having to let it run for hours was really, really useful for them. And then the idea about computability, it's not just about executing code, but instead a kind of like an agnostic mixing of multiple languages because they are so they're always improvising their tools. So being able to use multiple languages in the same environment was really useful, but then needing a way of kind of piping those together. So to conclude kind of the first point of, okay, there's a lot of attention at the moment and there's quite a big narrative around learning how to code, but there's very, very little reflection on what does the medium actually look like through which you'd be able to use that isn't just integrated development environments or the terminal environment. So that is the question that hopefully this research will point to or will get more people interested in, because what that medium actually looks like is still very much up for grabs. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's thank the speaker. Boom, boom. Great. Do we have any questions? When I was reading the paper, I found, let's put it this way, fun similarities between you describing the computational environment as a sort of a chaos. I don't think it's necessarily field specific, at least in my lab, it seems to be the same thing. Everyone has preferences about the tools, and then things like Jupyter notebooks are bringing some kind of remedy for that. But this is really a big problem in across a lot of disciplines. So, what is your take? What is your take? Was it somehow more of a chaos there, or was it just?
Well, so it was also one of the comments we had from the reviewer saying, "Oh, this is it sounds analogous to some of the other experience that they had," and definitely believe that that's true, but I haven't really researched those contexts, so I don't want to say too much about it. But even just from a teacher perspective, right, trying to teach new students in a humanities department where we are how to program, and then sometimes they have to use a terminal environment to implement some packages or something, is an absolute nightmare. And so being able to have some kind of, like with the computational notebooks like Jupyter, some packaging around it that is just much more approachable in that context would also be really, really useful, and is actually really, really useful. But I'm sure that this is an issue across different disciplines. But I think it got perhaps more pressing in this situation because of this computational culture that we talked about, right? The fact that they have no tradition of dealing with their tools in that way, that they have no training, formal training for it, and that they work on this frontier of science where nobody will ever develop a particular tool for them because they're always pushing beyond what is commercially available. And what's quite interesting, I didn't get to it here now, but that it's now become kind of a point of pride with different research labs to be able to produce tools that other people can use because there's nobody else that's supporting them, right? But that's really kind of a happy accident if you find somebody in your lab that just knows how to program well enough that they can put it on GitHub and other people can use it. Most of the time, it's very it's very ad hoc, and it's kind of, it's worrying that you have these amazing scientific discoveries that actually can't go anywhere because of mundane things like, oh, I tried to install this on my operating system, but I didn't know how to, change directories in Windows versus Mac.
Yeah, true. And you also mentioned that this was basically the end result of a 2-year undertaking, so which is very, very nice to read papers where something has taken long.
I mean, so
can you talk a bit about that? Did you have the same people working with you on their end, or?
It was like the start to finish was 2 years. There wasn't 2 years of continuous working on it.
Yes, of course.
And that, like, you also had like a large part of that was the availability of them, because obviously they had to do their own work as well. And there was also a shift in who we were working with in the lab, where the people in the beginning, by the time we kind of had like a full prototype at the end, had actually, either graduated or were too busy at that time or weren't doing the type of work that the tool was then designed for. So there was a bit of a shift in people that we're working with on that side. But that didn't really have any, it didn't really create any problems. The biggest thing that I think I struggled with, and I don't know about the rest of the research team, but just because of the investment in time from the participant side, it creates a real sense of responsibility that you should deliver something actually useful and productive for them. And the jury is still out on that. But that I don't think is necessarily a different, I don't think that's like a unique observation for participatory design approaches in general. But it's been a long time.
I guess that holds true for a lot of papers, that the jury is still out. So have to wait and see. Are you still working on this?
So at the moment I'm writing up my thesis, so I'm trying to minimize the amount of other things I'm doing. But depending on where my next step in my career is, I do feel like I honestly kind of just want to give them programming classes at the end of the week, so just so that I have somebody that they can talk to about this, because this is also one of the things that we realized through this process, that we became the more capable peer for them. So as they were using our tool, they were sharing the problems that they were having with their scripts, and we ended up just debugging the stuff that they were using and trying to educate them through the process of being part of the design. So that was really, really nice, but it's just I feel like I could probably really make their life a lot better if I just spent a couple of hours every 2 weeks with them.
Yeah, maybe you can get paid to do that. That would be a bit more feasible. All right, do we have any other questions? Yeah, you can unmute yourself. How interdisciplinary was the work done by you and your co-authors?
So to be able to evaluate whether something was interdisciplinary, I feel like you need to be able to position yourself in a discipline first. And I definitely don't. I know that, so we had 4 people working on this with different levels also of technical, not necessarily technical expertise, but how much they were excited about programming and how much they wanted to do bug fixing. And then some people had more experiences with kind of qualitative data collection. So I do think that actually made a big difference, because the paper also went through different phases of leading more towards one type of reporting versus another. And so the final one that we have now, I think, is quite a good balance of both a technical contribution of a working system that is quite high fidelity, plus I think quite detailed qualitative data as well. It also made it difficult to both write and present, I think, the structure of it. But yeah, it definitely had a mix of competences.
can I ask a follow-up?
Mhm.
So I also, like you said, some of the writers were very interested in programming and others were less interested in that part. And I was wondering, because I could kind of imagine two scenarios. Like one would be that those who really care about programming it might irk them to talk to people who don't do it as structured or who do it in different ways. On the other hand, it might be really engaging and sort of disengaging for the people who were not as into programming. Or did you feel anything? Was it when was it good to not care as much about programming, and when was it hard when you were trying to work with these people?
I don't think anybody was judging the participants for their
That
level of programming during the process. I think there was also in the kind of like the discussions we had with the participants, there was kind of an implicit role division as well, where the people who were closer to the level of skill as the participants were able to kind of like be the good cop first, be like, oh yes, no, I know programming is terrible and blah, blah, blah. And this really gets into kind of the fact that some of these sessions turned a bit therapeutic, where we're trying to explain to them like, no, the fact that you don't understand these things isn't because you're stupid, but because the way that software is designed right now is stupid, right? And so having that mix of those people with those sensitivities to these type of problems helped kind of like with the engagement with the participants.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Once again, let's thank all the speakers and remember the afterwork, which is starting soon after this. You'll find the link from the website. And once again, thank you.